What's up, gamers? It's your boy JKon. Welcome to another video. Yesterday, a very interesting topic came up on the r/Valorant competitive subreddit, and I thought that it was a really good conversation starter about star players. Now, this conversation about star players is something that I find very interesting because you have an argument of what makes a star player versus what makes a role player in not just Valorant, but in any sport, for example, like basketball. So I think it will be a very interesting conversation to kind of break down and go through. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're not, welcome back. Sorry that I've been so MIA. Again, I've been quite like a little off my rocker trying to make videos out here. So instead, I've been putting a little bit more effort into my streaming presence and kind of having conversations and talking points like this over there. So if you want to be part of the conversation live and you want to be like your name showing up in the chat and have interactive parts with this with me, slide through over on my Twitch channel. I did change the name because I did not like the TV at the end. So we are now twitch.tv/JKonxd, you know, like the smile. Shan't be too hard to remember or too big of a change, but please go check me out over there. I've been trying to stream a little bit more consistently, and that's kind of been my focus recently, less so on videos. However, it does not mean that we can't make videos while we're streaming. Anywho, the regular split for Americas will be coming back soon, so I will also be co-streaming that, so be on the lookout for that. Anyways, without further delay, let's get into it. So if we take a look at this Reddit thread, it says star player explanation. I was wondering how come most teams have their star player on the duelist role. If we look at the teams who have made either international, most teams, not all, have a duelist that's considered the best. In America, some of their players have been JKon, Cryo, and Aspas. In APAC, their best players have been Something, Jing, and Texture. In EMEA, they have Miniboo, CNED, and now Woot. When you look at other games tied to Valorant, Counter-Strike, and League of Legends, you get different answers. In CS, the star players are usually the oppers and or the players who are trying to trade the entry. They have a high amount of first kills, but not necessarily the most on their team. They are expected to live through most of the round while racking up kills. Players that match this are Ziwu and Monasi. Ziwu. In League of Legends, it's more of a mixed bag. The star player in that game can be in any game, I'm guessing in any lane, and can differ from game to game. As long as you have a champ that has playmaking abilities, you can be the most impactful player. It's hard to say who's the star player in any team since anyone can be. Compared to the other games, Valorant star players are duelists whose only abilities are ones that create space. It's a role where you do get a lot of support, but one where you wouldn't be surprised if you were the first to die since you're the one making space for the team. So they don't have as much playmaking abilities. Nor would you expect them to live long enough to get multiple kills. Why are the star players generally playing duelists, and do you expect the best player to always be on that role, or do you think that meta will shift and the players will be the initiator/controller/sentinels of the team? Okay, this was a lot to break down. So one of the touching points that I want to kind of counter argue for him is right here. He says it's a role where you do get a lot of support, but one where you wouldn't be surprised if you were the first to die since you're the first one in making space for the team. I think this meta particularly will put a lot of bias towards that, as we've had a single duelist meta that is very scrappy and very duel heavy. However, if you look historically at previous metas, we'll take last year, for example, Skye. Skye gave perfect info every single time. Her dog can get incredible info. Her flashes just give so much, and they were rechargeable back then. Her seekers were on a lower orb count, and they're still very, very good to this day. Skye, even though she is nerfed now, I still think Skye is a top initiator. Like, there's no question about it in my mind. Anyways, so when you make the comparison of star player in Valorant comparatively to Counter-Strike, Counter-Strike is a little bit of a different system because CS, everybody is on the level playing ground. Everybody can buy the same utility. Everybody can buy like the same weapons. Obviously side dependent, but there's no uniqueness to the individual player. So what comes down to star players in that regard is where are they positioned? Does their team play around them? Do they set them up? I think a very, very great example that we can use as a tie between Valorant duelists, who are their entry fraggers, to CS entry fraggers, is Donk. Donk is a superstar in the making. This 17-year-old kid on Team Spirit is a raw entry fragger, and this kid is absolutely insane. Donk is able to crack open up sites like it's nothing. He has incredible spray control. He doesn't have the greatest crosshair placement every single time. Like, some people have better crosshair placement than him, but he's still able to maneuver better. His movement, his positioning, his aggressiveness, his willingness to take certain timings. Those are things that he excels at, and you can say that he's their star player. But what should be praised very, very heavily for Team Spirit's system is that Chopper, their IGL, and all of their players are there to support Donk. Shiro, their Opper, their second best player, who you could regard as a star player, as Shiro can take over games and completely hard carry, they don't need to put as many resources into Shiro as they do Donk, because Donk rewards heavily, like extremely heavily, for how many resources he is given. So, very similar to the duelists in Valorant, they are usually partnered with initiators, with their controller players, somebody to set them up with flashes, darts, anything that will help them to get in there and create space and hopefully get the entry. You want to put a lot of resources into that, and I think it's a very similar system to how like Team Spirit would play with Donk. And that also goes down to what I was hinting at earlier, is roles. Because Valorant has specified and specific roles, there is an automatic kind of grouping together of certain players. I think a good example of a star player who's not a duelist is Leo. Leo, as the initiator player, is usually the second or third man in as that trader, and he's usually the one that you want to put into late game situations to clutch. Leo is incredibly smart, is great positioning, and honestly, he's just one of the most intelligent players I have ever seen play this game. And you want that ability to put him into late round situations. And yes, you could say you want your duelist in a late round situation because they have a lot of utility. However, it doesn't always work the same. And that's where I will bring us to a meta that we talked about in the past, which was like chamber meta. Chamber meta allowed the star player, usually the Opper, because the Op in Valorant is so powerful, and that's why Jett and Chamber were so dominant for years. That's why Jett will always remain meta, even though other agents and other players are picking up the Op. The Op will still remain no matter what. So, because of that, there was always an inherent tie of star players to Oppie. And I think that kind of puts that in the case of duelists as well. Because Jett was the best Opper in the game until Chamber came out, every single duelist entry fragger was a Jett player. Does that make them a good entry player? Not necessarily. We've seen great Jett players struggle at entry fragging, for example. Yay, Cryo at times, although he's gotten incredible at it, a lot better. But when you have someone diving, for example, Victor throwing himself in there, creating space, and then you put Ye into the late game situation by feeding him resources, by literally creating space for him, that is kind of how you would regard your star player. And it's such a weird argument to say like, oh, you want your player with your best aim to be the duelist player. I don't necessarily agree with that 100% of the time, because you've seen so much success from incredible aimers move over to other positions. Leaf on Sentinel this year, Foxy9 on Sentinel this year, who else is incredible? Meteor is like the really big one, right? You look at Charon on Gen G. All of these guys are incredible aimers and can all be regarded as star players in their own rights. So I don't necessarily like the idea of pinning quote unquote star players to whoever is like just the duelist. I think star players really are the players who you will funnel in resources and build strategies and plans around. And that's kind of like what I would say is my response to this. Now, to go into a larger conversation of like, what does it mean to be a star player versus like a role player versus a superstar? I think that's like a really, really interesting conversation. And I will bring up the NBA finals going on right now. Jason Tatum of the Boston Celtics is considered to be their best player. However, he has not been performing the best, but he's been making it up in other aspects, playing incredible defense, passing, creating openings for his teammates, all of those other aspects and whatnot that they're doing. I just think it's really, really cool. So, does Jason Tatum qualify as a star player? I would 100% say yes. But is he a superstar player? That's a little bit more questionable and debatable. And that goes into a conversation that came up on the subreddit as well of Boostio criticizing the NRG call of benching Demon 1 and having Victor play main duelist. Now, don't get me wrong. Victor is an incredible duelist player, incredibly flexible. You could consider him their star player if you'd like. Personally, for me, I think the star player is Psalm. Even though Psalm might not have like the most resources funneled into him. So again, I think it's a weird argument that you could say like you could be a star player but not your best player on your team, because the best player on the team could be a superstar. And I think the conversation that Boostio was trying to start was like, you kind of need one of those like top 3 to 5 guys. You need one of those guys to be able to like take you over the line. And this is like a conversation that's had in like every sport. You look at the NBA, for example, right? It's exactly what we're talking about. Is Jason Tatum one of those guys that can get them over the hump? Is he a Jokic? Is he a Giannis? Is he a Luka? Right? We don't know. The Celtics are on the verge of a sweep with both the Jays playing incredibly well. I wouldn't be surprised if Jaylen Brown gets it. Finals MVP instead of JT. But nonetheless, I don't think just having a top X player gives you a guarantee win. So in my opinion, even though Luka has been like kind of shat the bed the last game, Luka's like the best player in the series, right? At least going in and like the expectations of him comparatively to the other players, he's the best player in the series, right? But I'll compare him to like Aspas, right? Just because you're the best player on your team, maybe one of the best players in the world, if not the best player in the world. But if your team is not performing, if your team is not as good as another player's team, you can get beaten out. And I think that goes down to why I think star player and having one or multiple is an interesting conversation, because you look at what we call super teams of players that are stars that are all put together, right? And a lot of the times they don't work out. And the reason for that is like ego, positioning, role inflexibility, personality, etc., etc. There's a lot of factors that go into why super teams normally do not end up working well. So I think if you're vying for championships, I think you kind of need one of those top players, but you can't have one of those top players that does not have a good enough team to surround him with. And I think the chemistry surrounding players that can be that guy is more important, in my opinion, than just having that guy. Because I think you can have a team that has multiple stars. For example, we'll take Paper X. You have Jing, you have Something, you have Forsaken, you have Divide. Arguably, in my opinion, all like within the top 15 players in the world, all stars, if not superstars within this game. But something's missing right now in like their hump to get over for an international championship. Does not mean that they are bad, does not mean that they are unsuccessful. They are the most consistent team in VCT, like in all of Pro Valorant so far. So what they're doing works, but something's missing, right? A little bit, and we don't know what that is necessarily. So I don't know. I just think it's a very interesting conversation. I think there is a lot of merit in understanding how to be a role player. I think there's a lot of merit in being like a star role player. I think my example for this will be Magisk. He was the final piece to be added to Astralis when they went on to their GOAT era. He moved on to Vitality, won another major with them, and widely regarded as the best anchor player in the world. He puts up numbers that other anchor players don't, even though he doesn't get resources. Would you call him a star player, or would you call him a star role player? Or where does the line blur within that conversation? And that's kind of like the hard argument with like who is a star and who is not, who's a superstar, who's not, who's elite at what they do. I think somebody who is elite at what they do is Ethan. Ethan is an elite flash initiator player. Is he a star player? Some people could argue that he is. Some people would not. I would say he's an elite star role player for sure. So I don't know. I think this conversation is really interesting to me. Let me know down below in the comments what are your thoughts on star players versus role players, and honestly what you think constructing rosters should really look like. I personally think that having a superstar player and building around them with complementary pieces, not just star players but elite role players, I think is a better formula than putting together a team of stars. But that's just my perspective. I'm not a GM. Let me know again down below in the comments what you all think about this. And thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And until next time, stay hydrated. Peace.